Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a recent wrap-up, and I'm going to break the books up into 3 different sections. I'm going to start with a couple of DNFs, and then I'm going to get into a couple of books that I am currently reading, and then get into the books that I have completed. I'm actually really bummed about the books that I've DNF'd because I didn't actually want to DNF these books, but they just weren't as high priority. Most of you know I had an unexpected surgery that came up that kind of put me in the hospital for a couple days. That kind of threw a wrench in everything. So basically what I'm getting at is these were books that I was hoping to fit in, and unfortunately there are other books that I feel I've committed to that I need to get to first. So I do very much want to come back to these. The first one would be The Bitter Twins by Jen Williams. This is the sequel to the adult fantasy book Ninth Reign, which I thoroughly enjoyed. That book is such a hidden gem. I highly recommend it. It's such a great combination of so many different subgenres of fantasy. A big draw for this book is the discovery, because for a long time you don't exactly know what's going on because the main characters don't exactly know what's going on. They live in this world that periodically has wars, and these wars are known as reigns, and the reason they're known as reigns I can't really say because even that is one of the things that you discover. But they don't really know much about these wars because they take place every few hundred years. And there are some races of beings that live long enough that they should know, but one particular race they can't know really anymore because the older ones have died out from this strange plague that is affecting them. And there's a lot of difficulties between them and the humans anyway. And then there's witches. I really was excited about the second one. It started off with such a bang. So I'm really sad to have to put it down and come back to it later, but I'll get to it when I get to it. The other one I put down was Bone Witch. Please excuse the damage that my doggy did to this book. But this is essentially like a dual perspective story. It's the same person, but you're kind of getting present day and then past, and it's clear by the way it's set up that eventually these things will somewhat come together to reveal the difference between past and present, because you don't really know how the character went from point A to point B. I had decided to give myself an extra TBR, which was my before fall TBR, books that I thought would be well suited for fall that I wanted to read before the season so that I could give you recommendations and information about these books. So this one was on that list, but I'm gonna have to pick it up another time. Now to the 2 books that I am currently reading. I'm actually very curious, since I just mentioned that I'm currently reading more than one book, how many of you read multiple books at a time? I don't like to have too many going, but the 2 that I have going on right now, we have a young adult fantasy and an adult fantasy, and that would be The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness and then Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Elantris is a reread for me. I never did a dedicated review for this one. I don't remember this one very well, but I really wanted to read it leading up to Rhythm of War, and then I got an arc for Rhythm of War, so then this one kind of got set aside. I am glad that I started it before Rhythm of War because I did see some stuff that I was like, wait a second, that looks like something from Elantris in Rhythm of War, and I tabbed it, and then later in the book it was 100% confirmed that it was the thing from Elantris, and then I felt less clever. But this particular Sanderson book follows a society where they used to have this amazing race of people that became this amazing race through this thing known as the Shayod, and the Shayod would turn you into an Elantrian, which was this godlike being, and they would go off and live in the city of Elantris, but then something happened that now, instead of making you this godlike being, it basically turns you into a zombie. You're dead, but you're still alive. You don't have a heartbeat, and the pain when you stub your toe or hurt yourself never goes away. You don't really heal, but you don't die also. It's miserable. It's terrible. And so we are following one of our main characters who this has happened to, and they are discovering what Elantris is like now that this has happened to the people there. And then you're following what was supposed to be his arranged marriage wife, because they were royalty, and she never officially met him, but there was a little clause in their marriage contract that if he were to die, she would essentially be his widow. So she kind of belongs to his kingdom now. And so she's doing a lot of politicking. And then you have this priest character who is somewhat villainous, and you don't really know what's up with him, but he seems to want to cause some trouble. I'm liking it so much more on my second read, so I'm really excited to keep going with it. And then The Knife of Never Letting Go. I'm not too far into it yet, but it is very fascinating. I don't know what's going on. It has such a whirlwind beginning where you're following a character who lives in this place where women are dead, it's just men. He's the only boy left, and he's going to enter into manhood soon because his birthday is coming up, and some weird stuff is happening. He can hear the thoughts of everyone, including animals, and so can everybody else. So there's just tons of noise all the time. And the format of the book is very interesting in the way that it reflects the noise, and also the character never really learned to read. So he has very long run-on sentences because it's told in first person. There's a lot of things misspelled to sort of capture that element of this character. I can't comment much more than that because I haven't really gotten far enough, so I don't know what the heck is going on, but I definitely am really excited to find out. I have been doing reading sprints over on my Patreon if you're interested in following along with me as I continue my reads and you want to see more of my thoughts before I get the chance to do a dedicated review or another wrap-up. But those are super fun. If you don't know what a reading sprint is, basically, and we all just read together and then we take breaks and then we chat a little bit. And I've been doing these with Jessie from Jessie May and Jade from Bedtime Bookworm. So if you guys feel like joining, I'll have my Patreon link down below. Now to the books that I have completed. I did not realize how many of these were adult fantasy. I usually like to do a mix of adult and young adult, but pretty much the rest of these are adult. And I'm going to start with Sunlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is sold as a fantasy book, but it definitely feels very literary. It's abstract and absurd, strange, but it is fantasy. We follow a main character who decides to go with his new bride to the Tower of Babel at their honeymoon, and immediately, within the first few pages, they get separated. Now Senlin is trying to ascend the tower to find her, but each level of the tower is really weird. It took me a while to get into this book because I think I was expecting a more straightforward fantasy initially, and then once I kind of realized that it wasn't exactly a straightforward fantasy, it was, I think, easier for me to get into and accept. I don't know about you guys, but when I think a book is going to be one way and then it's very different, I always feel like I need an adjusting period. So hopefully that's helpful to know. I do have a whole dedicated review for this book if you'd like to hear more. I definitely recommend it, but I recommend it kind of with a little asterisk of this might not be for everyone. Next up is the big boy, which would be Rhythm of War and Dawn Shard. I also have dedicated reviews for these two. I did a combined review, and I'm going to have spoilery chats that are broken up by part for this. So part 1 is already up. I have a little calendar where you can try to follow along if you'd like so that you can see those as they come out. And then on December 9th over on World Hoppers, we'll be doing a collaborative chat live stream filled with spoilers. So if you want to use the calendar as a little reading outline for yourself and then join in on that chat on December 9th, we would love to have you. I can't wait to chat with you all, but oh my goodness, I loved this entry. The beginning is so fast-paced, and then it just doesn't really stop. I mean, of course, there's the occasional chapter that's not as intense, but that's the thing, there's the occasional chapter that's not as intense. So most of it is just really fast-paced, and you spend so much time with the characters and their mental health. Dawn Shard was fascinating as far as what it's showing you with the Greater Cosmere, which is the shared universe for Sanderson's adult fantasy books. But it's a short story novella. I'm not really the biggest fan of those. It follows side characters that I don't care that much about. So while it was interesting, it's hard for me to say too much about it other than, well, that was interesting. Of all of these, I had one young adult fantasy, and that would be The Beautiful by Renee Attier. This is a paranormal YA historical fiction fantasy book, and it's taking place in a time where women didn't have a lot of freedom. A lot of times for women to have really much stability and security in their lives, that came down to who they were going to marry, and we follow an unwed lady who has a mysterious past back in Europe, and she comes to America to escape that past. You kind of are discovering as the story goes on what that past is, and she's currently living basically in the church, but she's finding that there are some mysterious things going on in the city, some paranormal things going on, and you're kind of figuring out what the heck is happening with all of that. I've seen a big complaint that there's not enough paranormal stuff in this book. I think for my personal taste, would have to agree with that. I think I wanted more of the fantasy stuff, and I probably would have enjoyed it more. That doesn't mean it's a bad book. My friend Deshauna read it, and she ended up really enjoying it because it was almost more historical fiction fantasy. But I like historical fantasy books, but this one was really heavy, I thought, on the historical parts of it. And so everything was, so not a lot would actually happen, right? Like a character would be standing next to someone, and then they'd be having like all these thoughts, like, what are they thinking? The way that they just like clench their jaw, that must mean they're upset with me right now, but why would they be upset? And like they would this whole thing in their minds because a character like looked slightly annoyed for half a second. And I was like, I want the vampires though. Where are the vampires? I think a lot of people are going to like that angstiness about this one. But that's not, I like angst sometimes. In this particular book, I wanted more, of the killing people, the vampires. The last two books, I was a little lukewarm on. One of them is very popular here on BookTube, and that would be Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. This one, if you've heard anything about, I'm sure you've probably heard about the magic system, which involves changing the reality of objects through coding, essentially, called scribing, so you can tell objects that their reality is different. And it definitely takes a lot of practice. It's quite well established in the world. I know just talking about it, it sounds like anything is possible, but there are rules and limitations, while at the same time somewhat feeling limitless in what the possibilities are because of certain things that come up in the story. We follow our main character, Sanchia, who finds an object that seems to defy the rules of scribing, and she also herself defies the rules because you aren't supposed to be able to scribe a human, but clearly something's going on with her because she can sense things with objects. It's definitely really fast-paced, really action-packed, the magic is really fascinating, but something about the tone just didn't really click with me, and I think that it's going to click with so many people. The tone, the reason it didn't quite work for me is it was a strange combination of Sanchia and this inanimate object being able to speaking in a way that was very lacking in formality. It was very casual. If you're somebody who does not like when characters speak really casually in your fantasy books, that might bother you. That in and of itself wasn't a huge deal to me. I don't mind that too much, but it was this really casual way of talking, and kind of honestly a very juvenile way of talking, while also having lots of like blood and guts and really graphic violence, and then lots of references to like people having sex and things like that, where it was just strange because the tone, I thought, felt somewhat middle grade like. In my review, I said it kind of felt like a shonen manga, but then really graphic sometimes, which is not a bad thing. I just felt like I either wanted it to just embrace that it was cheeky and maybe not the most serious, or I wanted it to be more serious, and it kind of fell in an interesting in-between, and that in-between just wasn't my favorite. Last on the list would be The Queen of Sorrow by Sarah Beth Durst. This is the conclusion to the Queens of Renthia series. I have loved the first two. I have spoken of them often. This third one wasn't my favorite ending. I loved so much of it until I would say somewhere between the last 50 and 100 pages or so. Just went in a direction I was excited about, but the way that it wrapped up, I was not so thrilled about. I do think that the way the author did it, it was kind of a bold decision. It's definitely hard to speak on without revealing too much because it is the third book in a series. But I just found I wasn't quite satisfied with the ending. I was hoping for different things. I felt like in using this very bold decision that they somewhat negated some of the other things that they had presented before, which is all just personal opinions. I'm sure some people are going to absolutely love it. I think for me, the second one was my favorite. I still highly recommend the series. An amazing forest setting, high stakes, fast paced, very easy to get into if you're new to adult fantasy. I would highly recommend this one, but I didn't really like the ending. That's it for some books that I have read recently. Let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts were on them. If I have dedicated reviews, I'll have them linked down below. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.